Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar on the Housing Trust Fund and the eCon Planning Suite. My name is Chris Andrews. I'm a TA provider with the Cloudburst Group, and I'm joined by a couple folks from HUD today, Beth Hendricks from the Office of Block Grant Assistance and Jessica Sumanjaya from the Office of Affordable Housing Programs. Beth, Jessica, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Chris.
Today's webinar will last about 90 minutes. We've saved a lot of time to be able to go into IDIS, demo adding HTF to your action plan, to your comp plan, working through the process for subgrantees. And so we'll be spending a lot of today's session in IDIS. After the session, all of the slides, the transcript, and recording will all be posted on the HUD Exchange. A couple of recommendations for you all while you're on today's webinar. Recommend closing your email, any other programs on your computer that may conflict with the webinar software. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please type a question into the question pod in the webinar software. We do have a good number of you on the line today, so all participants will be muted. As you have questions, please go ahead and enter them into the questions pane. You'll see that you have both the Q&A and the chat pane, and recommend submitting those questions through the Q&A pane so we can make sure that we get to them as quickly as possible. We may not be able to answer all of your questions today. There may be some very specific questions that we're not able to answer to, and we may just not have time for all of them. At the end of the session, if you do have any remaining questions, we'll highlight where you can submit those questions. Our agenda for today, we're going to focus on adding the Housing Trust Fund to the action plan for state grantees. Many of you are in years 2 through 5 of your consolidated plan cycle, and you'll be looking to add HTF to your action plan. We'll then talk through the process for state grantees and adding HTF to the consolidated plan, and then finally walk through the process for HTF subgrantees, and then finally the reporting process for the HTF. Our objectives for today, we want to make sure we want to walk through the screens, the content that's required to complete your consolidated plan and your action plan, to be including the Housing Trust Fund program. Go over the process of exactly what does that look like in IDIS, and then the same process for subgrantees. How does a subgrantee add HTF into the consolidated plan or the action plan? And then finally talk about the relationship between HTF and your CAPR and how to make sure that you're reporting on your HTF projects in the CAPR. And before going into the content, just want to turn it over to Beth just to share a couple of updates on where we are generally in the FY 2018 program year as it relates to funding.
So we are still under a continuing resolution. Congress has not passed a budget yet. We do not have an appropriation amount for any grantee at this time. The continuing resolution is due to expire on Friday, March 23rd at midnight. At that time, we'll understand whether we have another continuing resolution or whether a budget passes. If and when a budget passes, it takes HUD approximately 60 days to begin to do the formula run to determine your annual allocation for the FY18. In the meantime, if you're worried about how to submit your plan, prepare your plan, or handle pre-award costs, please follow CPD Notice 1801. It's the same information contained in each annual notice on how to submit consolidated plans and annual action plans. Real important, no matter when allocations do come out, we must receive all plan submissions by August the 16th, 2018 in order for you to receive funding. And one more time, after our field reps review your plan submissions, Grant agreements will be executed and sent to you after plans are approved and congressional release occurs.
Great. Thank you, Beth. And I know you all are looking at that very small hyperlink for CPD Notice 1801. We will send a link out to that after today's webinar for everyone who is on today's session. Before going into the content, just want to get a feel for who is out there on the line with us today. So you'll notice that you have the option at the bottom of the participant list to raise your hand, the little hand symbol. And if you are a state grantee, could you go ahead and raise your hand? Click the raise hand button. Okay. Great. A good number of you all are state grantees. And now if you can go ahead, click your hand button one more time. And if you are an entitlement grantee, possibly an HTF subgrantee, go ahead and click the check mark, the little yes button there, if you are a subgrantee. Great, and we've got a few subgrantees on the line as well. So we're going to go through the process both for state grantees and also subgrantees, and I think for all of you on the line, either a state grantee or a subgrantee, it is very helpful just to be able to see what is the process for each other, and you can understand how the system works together and how your process works together. Before going into the action plan, just want to remind everybody where we are starting in 2018. So in 2016 and 2017, the con plan and the action plan were amended to update the priority needs, to update the resource, to update the goals, to include HTF. And then the action plans included elements from the HTF allocation plan. Beginning in 2018, and so for many of you who have already been in IDIS starting your action plans, you're starting your com plans, you've seen that there is now the inclusion of HTF as a resource, and there's some additional information specific to HTF in the eCon planning suite. HTF is automatically added for all states in the eCon planning suite. So even if you're in year 3 or year 4 of your comp plan cycle, HTF is automatically included as a resource. For the subgrantees on the line, you'll be able to indicate when you create a new action plan or when you create a consolidated plan if you are an HTF subgrantee. And so with that, we'll move on to adding HTF to the action plan. It looks like we're starting to get a couple of questions come in. Great, keep them coming. Hope to address many of your questions today, but we're through the session. But if you have them, please, we'll be addressing questions throughout the webinar. I'm going to just go through a quick summary here, and then we're going to move over to IDIS. But you'll see here, if you're copying or creating a blank action plan, so if the state is in year 2 through 5 of its comp plan cycle, when you create your action plan, HTF is automatically included as a program on the AD26 screen, on the admin screen of your action plan. And through the action plan, you'll be responsible for including HTF information in your expected resources, the AP15 screen, in your goals, in your allocation priorities, your method of distribution, the projects, and the program-specific requirements, which is where a lot of the questions from the paper-based HTF allocation plan have been included. Just want to pause on the projects. For state grantees, you are not required to complete your projects at the time of submitting your action plan. However, for that data to carry forward into your CAPR, at some point during the program year, recommend that you complete the project information in your action plan so that carries forward into your CAPR and all of that data is recorded. And so we're going to move into IDIS here, but we'll be talking through a couple of these action plan screens and setting up the HTF information. So let me just start sharing my desktop here. Okay, we're going to be in the UAT region of IDIS, and we're going to start by adding an annual action plan. And again, as you all know, when you're creating an annual action plan, you have two options. You can create a copy of a prior year action plan, or you can create a blank annual action plan that's associated with the corresponding consolidated plan. I'm just going to click on the Add button here, and you'll see in Programs Included, HTF is automatically included. It's automatically checked there. So in starting that new action plan, it will automatically assume that the state is receiving HTF and include that information in the resources and throughout the action plan template. Similarly, if you're copying the plan, you'll see here it doesn't have the option for you to click a button to automatically include HTF, but it will then automatically include that when the copy is made. And so I'm going to go ahead here. I'm just going to start a copy. Let me just pull information here for my copy. I'm just going to use today's date for our version. It's a new program year, so not an amendment. And we'll click Copy. Again, when you click Copy, it will pull you back here to your search criteria. So here's the version that I just created. And when I click Edit, you can go to the AD26 screen. You'll see it has automatically included HTF as a program. And moving on to the screens that we highlighted that you need to focus on, the first is the PRO5, Lead and Responsible Agencies. And you need to make sure that you're now including the information for your HTF administrator. If you've not yet completed this information, this field will be blank, and you'll need to add a department or agency as the lead for the HTF program. Next, on your consultation and participation, you should be including references to your HTF program, what you're planning to do with your HTF program, getting feedback and input on potential ideas or approaches to your HTF program, just as you do for the other CPD programs through your consultation with stakeholders and your participation with residents throughout the community or the state. Moving down to the AP15 screen, is your expected resources. And you might all recall when you were originally adding HTF, you had to add it as an other source of funding here. And you'll see here that it's twice. It is now listed directly as HTF and as other. If it is showing up there as other, if you're copying your plan and it's pulling that data forward, you'll want to delete that second entry, that other entry, and just use the HTF that automatically populates in the priority table for that 2018 action plan and going forward. For your annual goals, for your allocation priorities, for your method of distribution, and for your projects, you would be entering all of your HTF information as it relates to your goals, as it relates to your allocation priorities, your method of distribution, and making sure that you're including your HTF projects in your annual action plan. And so all of that information is including the content just as you include your other CPD programs in talking through those slides. Where you have the most HTF relevant information is on the AP90 screen, the program-specific requirements. And if you scroll down, you will come to the HTF. And here's where you'll see these are where all of the questions from your HTF allocation plan are now entered in the eCon planning suite in your action plan, in the AP90 program-specific requirements screen. Through most of the fields, you'll see that they're text box entries, and you have the option near the bottom to be able to attach any additional information. But all of this content should be updated for your 2018 program year for your HTF program. At the very top of this screen, you have 3 radio buttons to select from, and you need to answer this question to be able to address all of your HTF program information. 1, will you, the agency, be overseeing the HTF and our funds being distributed to applications being submitted by eligible recipients, our funds being distributed to subgrantees that are state agencies, or applications being distributed to subgrantees that are other HUD CPD entitlement grantees. And Jessica, I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit here about the nuance of subgrantees that are state agencies.
Sure, Chris. So what this question is referring to is the method of distribution for your HTF funds. So how will you distribute your HTF funds? Are you going to be selecting from a pool of eligible applicants? Will you be splitting maybe your HTF funds with another state agency, or will you be subgranting maybe some of your HTF funds to other HUD CPD entitlement grantees? And the options that you select on this question are going to determine whether or not you get an additional HTF allocation plan screen, so the AP91 screen. So I think the important thing here is to make sure that if you're a state agency who's functioning as the HTF grantee, so from the previous, is it the PRO5 screen that Chris showed previously where you are the lead agency, if you are a state agency that is functioning as the HTF grantee, you do not want to check subgrantees that are state agencies. You only want to select that if you plan on subgranting some of your HTF funds to another state agency.
Great. So to that point that Jessica just made, I've now checked, I'll just come back here and highlight, I've checked the subgrantees that are state agencies box, and we'll come back and click Save and Return. And I now have a new field to complete program-specific information for state agency subgrantees. So again, if you are the state agency, maybe you are the state agency of housing and you are subgranting your funds to the Housing Finance Authority, the State Housing Finance Authority. And so you would select that radio button and then complete the AP91 field for that state agency subgrantee.
That's right. So I think in Chris's example, let's say we're talking about the state of Kansas's HTF grant, and the HTF grantee happens to be the Kansas Housing Resources Corporation. But the Kansas Housing Resources Corporation plans to subgrant a portion of its HTF funds to the Kansas Development Finance Authority. And the Kansas Housing Resources Corporation would select the subgrantees that are state agencies button on the AP90 screen. just so we're 100% clear on this, the expectation would be that the Kansas Housing Resources Corporation, as the HTF grantee, would complete the AP90 screen, and the Kansas Development Finance Authority, as the subgrantee, would complete the additional AP91 screen.
And a tip that we recommend in that instance is you can print the fields from the AP91 screen and share those. You can download the document as a Word document if that state agency subgrantee doesn't have access to IDIS or doesn't have access to the con plan or the action plan fields. You can share that Word document to help gather that information and work on that collaboratively. Now, I do just want to say something. I know we touched earlier on projects and of making sure that your projects are entered at some point during the program year, potentially through copying and opening up your plan if it's been marked as review completed. Something that Beth and I have talked about through a couple of other webinars that we've done this month is when you resubmit that plan, make sure that it is marked as review completed once you've added all those projects to it, because only when it is marked as review completed will all of that information carry forward into your CAPR. And that is the process for the action plan for entering the HTF information. So the information that you were putting into your allocation plan, all of the information that you were gathering, none of that is changing. It just is where you're entering it is now in a new location, and it's all included in the eCon planning suite. With that, I'd like to just pause, John, if we have any questions that have come in on action plans.
Thanks, Chris. Yes, we have a couple of questions that have come in on the action plan. The first question is, how does the action plan need to be submitted? So how the action plan is submitted, I'm just coming back to the PowerPoint deck here, is it's submitted through the through the eCon planning suite. And in this case, to the point that Beth made earlier, we are still under a continuing resolution, so until you receive your final allocation amounts, you are not able to submit your 2018 action plan. And again, want to just highlight CPD Notice 18.1 for guidance on how to prepare yourself for potentially a delay in submitting your action plan until those allocations are made. But as an absolute deadline, all action plans must be submitted by August 15th or August 16th. Thanks, Chris.
Questions?
Yeah, we have one more question here. As a state grantee, what if we are not sure what our projects will be when preparing our action plan?
It's a great question. I think for state grantees, that is a common occurrence in not knowing the details of what your projects will be when you are submitting your consolidated plan. You're able to highlight at a higher level through your method of distribution and through your goals what your approach will be. And then as you identify and create your projects and initiate your projects, to the point that I just made, recommend creating a copy of your action plan so you're able to go in and modify your project screens and the project screen and include all of those projects that you've started so that the data carries forward into your CAPR and you're able to report on the outcomes from those projects in the CAPR in a seamless way. I'm going to skip ahead here. I think, John, any other questions or move on to the consolidated plan?
I think it'd be great to move on to the consolidated plan now.
Okay. Well, for state grantees, for adding HTF to your consolidated plan, and again, we'll go into IDIS and demonstrate this, but just like with the action plan, you'll see that HTF is now included in the program's included radio boxes. So what had originally just been CDBG, Home, ESG, and HOPWA, it now includes HTF. And again, we'll move into IDIS in just a second, but I think the important thing to note in your consolidated plan is that your consolidated plan includes your year one action plan. So that program-specific requirements, those elements within the action plan that we were just discussing, those are all included in your consolidated plan for year one. Additionally, you'll need to complete the elements of your strategic plan to highlight the goals, the needs, your institutional delivery structure, the resources, and if applicable, any geographic target areas or priority areas that are related to your HTF program. And then finally, the consultation and the citizen participation process referencing HTF just like you do with all of your other CPD programs. So we're going to go into IDIS and just highlight this real quick. I'm going to pause the PowerPoint here. Okay. And I'm going to come into the consolidated plan. And I'm going to start by just adding and creating a blank consolidated plan. And again, as I noted before, HTF is automatically included as a program under 2018, 2022. I will just say 320 test. Our version will be 32018. Plan is for a grantee. We do need to select the housing authorities. I'm just going to go ahead here and just select one housing authority to save this information. We'll now click Save. And again, coming into the AD25 screen, you'll see that HTF is included as a program. If you are starting a comp plan in 2018, and I believe a few of you on the line are, you will need to go in and update the PRO5 information. To make sure that you're including your HTF administrator. And again, just like in the action plan, you'll want to complete the consultation and citizen participation, including references and input related to your HTF activities and program. In your strategic plan, highlighting the goals, highlighting the resources, and again, just like we showed you all in the action plan, HTF will automatically now show up as a source of funding. Now, it looks like there were a couple of questions that came in related to adding a project to an action plan for a state grantee. If you are coming back in and creating a copy of your comp plan or your action plan to add those projects partway through the year. So I'm just going to pause here and just quickly demonstrate that. if you come into the AP35 screen, and if you've already created that project in IDIS, you can add it to your action plan by clicking Add an Existing Project, and then using the search criteria to identify that project. So I'll just use 2017 here, and you'll see it will pull up the projects from 2017, and by clicking Add, I can now include that project in my annual action plan. Once I click Add, I will want to then open up that project from the AP35 screen and just complete a little bit of additional information related to the corresponding goal, the goal outcome indicators, and the priority needs to make sure all of that information carries forward. But great clarification. Thanks for asking.
Chris, one point of that's important for folks to know. It's very important that it's current program year projects that are added into the action plan, so you don't want to add prior year projects. In this example, we're using 2017 simply because we don't have 2018 projects yet. So real important when you're adding existing projects, you're adding projects for the current program year.
Great. Thank you, Beth, for that clarification. Absolutely. Okay, I will just return here to the AP35. But then again, on the action plan, just as you were completing this information for your year 2 through 5 action plan, the same information is there on the AP90 screen. All of the questions from the housing or from the HTF allocation plan are included there in the AP90 field. Jessica, anything that you would like to add on the consolidated plan?
No, I think you've covered everything.
Great. Let's see, John, I know it looks like we've gotten a few questions in for subgrantees, but any questions that have come in on the consolidated plan?
Chris, there is one question just asking for clarification about what you said regarding the status is being changed to review completed, whether that was for the grantee or the HUD field office to do.
Yep, absolutely. So the process for submitting your plan is from the AD25 or AD26. For you, as the grantee, we'll enter that as submitted for review and then click Save and Return. At that point, the field office reviewer will mark and change the status from submitted to review completed, or it can be returned back to you as a reviewed and waiting for modification. And great clarification.
So real quick here, a really important key trick to know about the system is review completed tells IDIS to pull the information you entered into the eCon planning suite into your next document. And until your plan is in review completed status, it's considered by the system to be a draft. So if you want any of your updates, anything that you've changed in your plan to show up in your next action plan or CAPER, you need to make sure your rep changes it to review completed before you create your next action plan or CAPER. That's how the system works. Review completed says pull the data into the next document.
Absolutely. Okay, with that, we're going to come back to the PowerPoint here, and we will move on to talking about HTF and subgrantees. So sorry, let me just here change my IDIS profile so we'll be able to go in as a subgrantee. Okay, moving to subgrantees. So an HTF subgrantee, entitlement subgrantees will indicate when setting up their action plan or their comp plan, that they will be receiving HTF resources for that program year. By indicating in the setup of the action plan or the comp plan that the grantee is a subgrantee, you will need to complete additional information in the AP90 field, in the program-specific information field. And you also need to include HTF in the strategic plan or in the action plan goals and resources and projects. Now, if you indicate that you received HTF in maybe year 2 in 2018, but then in 2019, if you create a copy of your plan and the HTF information is included, but you're not receiving HTF in that subsequent year, you can just go ahead and leave all of those fields as blank, and it's an opportunity to use your executive summary or an overview of your resources to indicate that you're not receiving additional HTF funds for that program year. And so with that, we're going to go back into IDIS here. And let me just start sharing my screen again. Now coming into IDIS as an entitlement grantee. And you'll see here, if I go ahead to add an annual action plan, and for some of you on the line, if you've started your 2018 action plan or started your comp plan, you might have noticed this, is that I now have a new question to indicate yes or no if the grantee is a housing trust fund subgrantee. And that question is true if you're both adding or if you're creating a copy of an annual action plan. So we'll go ahead and we'll create a new action plan. Today's title, and the version will be today. Oops. And we'll indicate associated with the con plan. We'll go ahead and search for that con plan. And now on the AD26 field, you'll see that it indicates the grantee is a housing trust fund subgrantee. Again, for a subgrantee, just like if you are a state grantee, use your consultation, your citizen participation to talk through what you are planning to do with your HTF resources and sharing that information on your program just as you do related to all your CPD programs. To include HTF as an expected resource on the AP15 field, unlike a state grantee, it will not automatically pop up on the table, and you will need to add an additional resource. And you do that by clicking the Add button in the far right-hand column at the bottom of the Resources table. And from the drop-down list, you'll see that you're able to select Housing Trust Fund. You can enter the funding amount available. If you're expecting more, the duration of the consolidated plan or not, enter that information, a brief description, the source, You can go ahead and select any of the housing elements. Oops. And save and return. And HTF will now show up as a funding source on your annual action plan. Now when you're completing your goals, just as you can associate CDBG or home or ESG with a goal or with a project, you can also associate the Housing Trust Fund with those goals and with those projects. Coming to the AP90 field, just like for state grantees, there is now HTF relevant information. And this includes a summary of the distribution of funds, of the approach, of what the grantee plans to do with the resources, and answering a series of narrative questions about the HTF program for that subgrantee. All of this information needs to be filled out as part of the annual action plan. Now again, if you do receive funding in 2018, but maybe you don't receive HTF funding in 2019, when you create the copy of that action plan, all of this information will be filled out. You can just go ahead and remove that manually to leave those fields blank if you're not receiving HTF in that subsequent program year. Jessica and Beth, before moving on to answering questions that we've gotten in on subgrantees, anything that you would like to add for subgrantees or on these fields?
I think just in general, when you're completing your AP90 screen, whether you're a subgrantee or whether you're the state HTF grantee, I think one of the things we want you to keep in mind here is that you should be reviewing your HTF allocation plans very carefully each year. So you should always be making sure that what's on those screens accurately reflects what you plan to do with your HTF funds that year. So, for example, if in your 2016-2017 HTF allocation plans, you only plan to undertake new construction activities with your HTF funds, but now we're in the third year of the HTF program, now you've decided you want to expand into housing rehabilitation projects, your allocation plan for this year should now include your rehabilitation standards. So please do not forget to attach your rehab standards to the AP90 screens. Do not forget to complete all of the fields related to housing rehabilitation that in previous years' allocation plans maybe were not applicable to you. And similarly, if your method of distribution changes from previous years, so let's say in the past you had subgranted all of your HTF funds to subgrantees, but now you've decided that instead you would like to award your HTF funds by selecting from a pool of eligible applicants. Now in your AP90 screen, you must include detailed selection criteria in the allocation plan. So do not forget to complete these fields. I think one of the concerns is that with the ability to copy over action plans from year to year, it might be easy for you to forget to attach your additional documents and complete additional fields. So please make sure that you are comprehensively reviewing the AP90 and AP91 screens before submitting your consolidated plan and action plan.
And Jessica, that's great guidance throughout the consolidated plan and action plan. I think the copy feature is a wonderful feature to be able to bring some information forward from one year to another, but absolutely do a deep review of all of that content and information, because things change from year to year. And especially as you're looking at your resources, your goals, your projects, make sure all of that information is current for the program year. It doesn't look like we've had any other questions come in, so we'll come back and we'll wrap up in talking about reporting. Okay. For HTF reporting, again, all of your HTF projects, and this is starting here with 2016 and 2017, all of your HTF projects were associated with goals in the action plan, in the consolidated plan, and you're using your narrative field to supplement the accomplishment information in your CAPR. And this is where you may have, be using, as noted here, the other source of funding being HTF. But you're using the narrative field to be supplementing all of that information. So for those of you starting or working on your 2017 CAPRs, you'll both be able to update and modify the actual fields throughout the CR05, but you can then also use the narratives. On the resources expended and resources made available, for those of you in 2017, the other field, this will be your HTF field, or an aggregation of all of your other sources of funding. And again, as you're working on your 2017 CAPR, use your narrative field to be adding more detail and clarity. I think something that in webinars earlier this month that Beth and I have both talked about is your CAPR is really your time to tell your story of what did you do this year, and you want to make that information as clear as possible to the community, to your stakeholders, to the residents, and to use those narrative fields to add the additional detail as you need. Starting in 2018, with HTF for state grantees being included as a resource, it will automatically populate your CAPR just like it does for CDBG and Home, and ESG and HOPWA in terms of the resources, the goals, the accomplishments. All of that information will populate exactly the same as the other CPD sources of funding. For non-state subgrantees, HTF will be entered as other. And again, you'll be using the narrative to supplement and provide additional information and detail related to those other entries, both in terms of resources and in terms of goal outcome indicators. In the last webinar that we did a couple of weeks ago, we talked through best practices in preparing your CAPR. And if you do have questions, if you weren't able to join us for that webinar, I highly recommend that you all look at those PowerPoint slides or the transcript or the recording to talk through what are some of the best practices in completing a CAPR. Okay, so just wrapping up. For state grantees, if you have a consolidated plan that's beginning in 2018, make sure that it includes HTF. So if your consolidated plan start year is 2018, make sure that you're including HTF by checking the box as the resources we demonstrated here. For action plans, and for all of your action plans starting in program year 2018, make sure that you're completing all of the fields and screens that we talked through today, and especially making sure that you're going through and completing all of the information in the AP90 field. Third, make sure that HTF is being included throughout your strategic plan and action plan, that it's being included as a goal, as part of your method of distribution, as part of your allocation priorities, priority needs, as part of your geographic target areas or priority areas. And then finally, as I just said, making sure you're going through all of that program-specific information and requirements on the AP 90 and 91 screen.
Right, and just to reiterate here, if you are a state agency that is the actual HTF grantee, you will be completing the AP 90 screen. The AP 91 screen, again, is just for state agency subgrantees. And the way to get the AP 91 screen to appear in your consolidated plan is to check the option that says you will be utilizing state agency subgrantees on the AP 90 screen.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. And for entitlement subgrantees, if you are receiving HTF, make sure that you're marking HTF subgrantee when creating your consolidated plan or your action plan. And again, just like for state grantees, make sure that you're including the HTF relevant information in your strategic plan or your action plan related to resources, priority needs, goals, or projects. And then again, make sure that you're completing that AP 90 program-specific requirement information. And if you are not receiving HTF in the subsequent year, if you're not going to receive it next year, you can leave those HTF elements blank, or you can enter NA. Now, it looks like we've gotten a few more questions. I know we've gotten a couple of either very detailed questions or more policy-oriented questions. And for those questions, you can submit them to your local CPD rep, or you can email htf@hud.gov. If you do have eCon Planning Suite HTF system questions after this, you can please go ahead and submit those to the eCon Planning Suite help desk, the Ask a Question desk on the HUD Exchange. And for more general HTF or IDIS questions, you can also submit those through through the IDIS help desk on the HUD Exchange. But I think, John, we've gotten a few more questions before we wrap up, and hopefully a few more of you all are entering more questions here, if you have them.
Yes, Chris. So we did get one question. Can you clarify who a state subgrantee is? I know you did it once already, but they would like you to clarify again.
Absolutely. That's a great question. So I think this is, Jessica used the example of Kansas as the agency that is responsible for completing the consolidated plan. If they choose to then subgrant to the State Housing Finance Authority or to another state agency, that agency that they are then allocating a share or a portion of their HTF funds to would be considered a state subgrantee.
Okay, thanks, Chris. And one more question we have. What happens if a subgrantee receives HTF one year but does not receive funds in a subsequent year?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think if you're a subgrantee and you may receive funds in 1 year or 2 years, but then not in the following year or the next few years of your comp plan cycle. And if you're copying your action plan, some of that information may stay as you copy it, and you can zero it out or delete the information or just enter NA. And to the point that I made earlier on the caper of being your opportunity to tell your story in the caper and make sure everyone understands what you did, what you accomplished, You can also use your executive summary or use the summary of your resources or your goals to indicate that you are not receiving HTF funds this year, or that you haven't received them, but you plan to pursue them in the following year and future years. So I think Jessica and Beth, I think it doesn't look like we have any other questions in the pool. I know we have a little bit more time if there's anything that you would like to demonstrate again or to highlight. I want to open it up for you all.
If you have basic questions about how to use the eCon Planning Suite, particularly some of the questions that came in today around project setup, we encourage you to use our resources on the HUD Exchange Consolidated Plan page, in addition to the webinars that we've posted there, the resource guides, our desk guides, and our quick guides.
Great. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Very much appreciate you all taking the time. For those of you in the Northeast, hope you all are staying dry. And if you do have questions, you can send them into htf@hud.gov or follow up with your CPD rep, or if it's an eCon Planning Suite or IDIS HTF related question, please submit those to the corresponding AAQ pools from the HUD Exchange. We'll be sending out an email after today's session that includes the CPD notice 1801 that Beth referenced, as well as the other resource documents available on the eCon Planning Suite. Thank you all for joining us, and have a great afternoon.